Welcome to another insightful episode of the Phosphorus Podcast, your go to source for unraveling the mysteries of phosphorus and its impact on our world. I'm your host, Jihan Zian, and today we have the privilege of diving deep into the realm of soil science with a distinguished guest, Tom Brulsema. Could you please introduce yourself and share a bit about your background and journey in the field of soil science?
Yes, I'm Tom Brulsema, and I'm speaking to you from Ontario, Canada, where I actually was born. I had a background in farming in southern Ontario and became familiar with all the field crop activities associated with growing barley, small grains, corn, maize, and hay as well. Eventually, I went to the University of Guelph for a degree in agricultural science and then a master's in crop science, where I studied the contribution of nitrogen from a crop of clover to a succeeding crop of corn or maize. I also studied physiology of yield formation in corn. From there, I went to Bangladesh for 4 years and worked with a diverse array of crops and cropping systems. And we were introducing soybeans into the country, and that was also my first encounter with the concepts of sustainability as they originated in the Brundtland Commission at the United Nations level. Following the stint in Bangladesh, on my return, I went to Cornell University and studied there for a PhD on nitrogen cycling. I focused on soil microbial biomass as well as soil crop system modeling, and that led to some research work in site-specific management of nitrogen as well. I served as director for the Potash and Phosphate Institute, mainly for the region of Eastern Canada and the Northeastern US. And I've been based here for about 30 years, working with the fertilizer industry on many issues related to nutrient stewardship. And some of those include potassium nutrition of dairy forage crops, soil test interpretation for phosphorus and potassium, plant nutrition for functional food qualities and nutraceutical components in crops, including soybeans, tomatoes, and apples. I worked on managing crop nitrogen for weather and greenhouse gas emissions from cropping systems and fertilizer use, and also got involved in issues of phosphorus and water quality, partly associated with livestock manure in general, and then also very specifically when Lake Erie started having a recurrence of algal blooms. So I served for a few years as a phosphorus program director with the International Plant Nutrition Institute. And currently, I still continue to advise fertilizer associations on their pressing issues with nutrient stewardship.
What are the key roles of phosphorus in soil health, and how do these impact sustainable agricultural practices?
Well, two key things to remember about phosphorus is it's an essential element. It's essential for plants to complete their life cycle, and it's often limiting the growth of plants. It gets tied up in the soil very easily, and for that reason, we often see that crops need additions of phosphorus in order to reach their optimum yields. And for when crops reach optimum yields, they also grow better. And it's plants that provide the carbon that accumulates as crop residues and becomes soil organic matter. That's fundamental to remember in any program to build soil health, to build soil organic matter, is that it all comes from the plant. And so when we optimize the nutrition of plants, that is the fundamental source of carbon for those things. Carbon plays roles in the plant in carbohydrate transfer, in photosynthesis and respiration, and all the energy mechanisms in plant biochemistry. Much of the phosphorus that plants take up is removed by harvest in the grains and fruits. It's also retained in the soil. There is a legacy often of phosphorus applications. If it's over-applied, soils become very rich in phosphorus. If it's under-applied, the soil becomes depleted. Many African soils are very low in phosphorus, and it's one of the many factors that limit crop growth there. The other important yield constraints can include water, soil organic matter, availability of good seed, crop protection from weeds, insects, and diseases. All of these need to be kept in mind in terms of ensuring we have crops growing at their optimum growth rates so that they support not only economic yield but also contribute carbon to the soil. Crop yield limits organic matter limits yield. And so there's a possibility of a spiral, either a downward or upward. If you supply not enough nutrients, then slowly yields get smaller and smaller. Contributions of carbon to the soil get smaller and smaller, and soil organic matter is depleted. If we want to reverse that spiral, you start with small incremental improvements in crop production, and it's only when you've built a base that crop yields can improve more dramatically, and then you can have larger contributions of soil organic matter and improved soil health.
What are the implications of phosphorus management in soil for achieving sustainable agricultural systems?
Well, when we talk about the phosphorus management in soil, the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship apply. We strive to apply the right source of phosphorus at the right rate, at the right time, and in the right place. The right source needs to be available to the farmer at an affordable price, and it needs to release soluble phosphate to the plant. The source itself can be mineral or organic. Processed ammoniated phosphates are the most soluble and the most available to plants, and that's why they are the most common fertilizers. Of the mineral fertilizers. Certain rock phosphates and other slowly soluble sources that are recovered from waste streams can also contribute plant available phosphorus, particularly in soils with acidic pH levels. For agricultural systems that include livestock and poultry, it is important to make use of all available manures as well as a source of phosphorus, and that would be one of the organic sources of phosphorus, which in actual fact they contain a large amount of mineral and soluble phosphorus. So that's right source. The right rate needs to consider the current status of the soil. Is it low, optimal, or high in available phosphorus? This can be determined by a soil test, or it can be determined by a nutrient omission trial. If the soil test level is optimal, we need to apply enough to replenish removal. If it's low, a little more than removal. If high, less than removal, or even zero might be the right rate. The right time for phosphorus application is most often just before or at seeding for most crops. Phosphorus moves only very slowly in the soil, so it needs to be placed ahead of time. And the right placement is where the roots are going to be growing for active uptake. Often this can be achieved in a band beside and below the seed row. Roots grow extensively through the soil, however, so ensuring that the bulk topsoil contains enough available phosphorus is important as well. Putting it all together, applying the right source at the right rate, time, and place ensures high crop yields with optimal phosphorus use efficiency, 2 key components of sustainable agricultural systems.
Given your expertise, how do social and economic factors influence phosphorus management strategies within the context of sustainable development?
Well, when we consider sustainable development for the farmer, economics comes first. A farm cannot sustainably produce without profit. So management strategies that reduce substantial nutrient losses and enhance the crop's ability to capture and take up applied nutrients, they can be profitable if they cost more, even if they cost a bit more than the farmer's current practice. But there are some large impacts from small losses, however. that can be costly to mitigate and provide little direct return to the farmer. And so one example is the loss of phosphate in the dissolved form. Normally, there's very little loss of dissolved phosphorus because when it's mixed with the soil, even the most soluble phosphate fertilizers adhere to the soil particles. But when such fertilizers are left on the soil surface just before a rainstorm that generates runoff from the field to the stream, that runoff may be enriched in phosphate, enough to trigger a harmful algal bloom. In some situations, the cost of applying phosphate fertilizer with subsurface placement in the soil is higher than the benefit that the farmer will receive, even though it can be effective in reducing the runoff and the risk of algal blooms. Another example is the loss of nitrogen as nitrous oxide. As a global average, it's 1% of the fertilizer nitrogen applied. Using a nitrification inhibitor can reduce that loss by 50%. With a significant benefit to the total emission of greenhouse gases. But the benefits to yield and nutrient use efficiency are only in the range of 5 to 15%. Those benefits may not be enough to pay the additional cost of the inhibitor. If that keeps farmers from using inhibitors, the societal cost of the nitrous oxide emission is not accounted for. In both these examples, dissolved phosphate loss and nitrous oxide loss, society could benefit by recognizing and rewarding farmers who adopt practices that mitigate those specific losses. So one of the social factors that influences the adoption of some of these practices for nutrient application is certification. Programs that certify agri-retailers and crop advisors help society to recognize the benefits for our nutrient stewardship practices. Other social factors can include government cost share programs and environmental credit trading programs as well. So they play a big role here in sustainable development. Well, one example of a government cost share program here in Canada, we had an emissions reduction initiative where the government suggested a target of reducing nitrous oxide emissions from fertilizer use by 30% by the year 2030. And farmers were a little bit upset by that target because they didn't know how to achieve it. And also it was going to the practices to achieve that might cost them money. We still haven't fully resolved all the questions associated with that, but one of the programs the government came out was an on-farm climate action fund, which paid a certain percentage of practices like use of nitrification inhibitors and other practices that help to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
As a scientific advisor, how do you perceive the evolving perspectives on phosphorus management globally, and what challenges do different communities face in managing phosphorus effectively?
Well, certainly different perspectives become popular at different times. For phosphorus, for example, the concern with the finite nature of phosphate rock reserves has surfaced and submerged and resurfaced and resubmerged many times. The reserves of phosphate rock are indeed finite, but our knowledge of them is also incomplete. We do know of enough reserves to supply phosphate fertilizer at current rates for hundreds of years. What we don't know is how much demand will increase with the growing number and purchasing power of the world's people. Another perspective that applies to phosphorus was how to control its transfer from agriculture to affected water bodies. When I was an undergraduate student here at the University of Guelph in the 1970s, phosphorus loss was considered from agriculture was considered to occur only by soil erosion. The first programs to protect Lake Erie aimed at reducing the phosphorus load to the lake, and the major controls were on sewage treatment plants, and then programs to encourage farmers to adopt conservation tillage, no-till practices, and it led to cover crops as well, all with the intention of keeping the soil on the farms and keeping the soil from eroding away, because with every particle of soil, Some phosphorus is lost as well, but that is phosphorus in the particulate form. Then, as time went on, it became more of a manure management issue, ensuring that manure applications did not lead to unlimited enrichment of soil phosphorus. And that was spurred on by some of the other contaminations that are possible from manure as well, where manure contaminates drinking water sources and that sort of thing. So the focus there was improving manure management, and phosphorus was a big part of that as well. And then in around the year 2007, people started noticing that algal blooms in the western end of Lake Erie were starting to increase, as well as the monitored phosphorus levels in the rivers of dissolved phosphorus, not the total phosphorus, but the dissolved phosphorus seemed to be increasing. And this was poorly understood at first, but it seemed that what was happening was that as farmers adopted all this conservation tillage where they're disturbing the soil less, the phosphorus fertilizer was not getting mixed in. Farmers were continuing to broadcast a lot of phosphate fertilizer, leaving it on the soil surface, and it was not only that fertilizer, but the accumulation of nutrients at the soil surface led to higher levels of dissolved phosphorus in the runoff water. And so that's a new perspective on controlling phosphorus loss. The 4R program, putting with the emphasis on timing and placement, was able to come on board and encourage better practices for phosphorus placement, better practices for phosphorus timing, so that these incidental losses of dissolved phosphorus from fertilizer applications could be controlled. And that's where the 4R certification program actually came into being. Fertilizer dealers, by wearing the 4R certified logo as a brand, could assure their customers and could assure the public that they were doing their part to protect Lake Erie, which was a resource well loved and appreciated by everyone involved in the watershed, including the fertilizer dealers, farmers, and the general public. So the evolving perspective then is the application of the 4Rs to nutrient loss, and that it's not just rate, it's source, timing, and placement that have important controls on the fate of fertilizer nutrients. And by looking at source, timing, and placement and the appropriate rate, we ensure that the greatest fraction of nutrients applied goes to benefit the crop and not harm the environment. Responsible plant nutrition is a perspective that goes even a step further, looking at the interaction of nutrient stewardship with the full integrated management of farming systems. So more recently as well, there are platforms that support the businesses that are involved in phosphate recycling. I've been involved in several international conference series at the scientific level, which focused on more sustainable management of phosphorus. And together with nitrogen, phosphorus is also part of the planetary boundaries. So far, that discussion on planetary boundaries is rather academic, but the focus has changed from a limit on extraction of phosphate to a limit on losses to rivers, lakes, and oceans. And so more focus on stewardship and management of phosphate as a resource. So, and finally, of course, there is an age-old perspective of many farmers who perceive phosphorus as an asset that they can retain in their soils and support their farm's productivity.
As technologies continue to advance, what innovative approaches or technologies are emerging to address phosphorus management and enhance soil health sustainably?
Right. Well, there's a number of technologies, and some of them we have some confidence that they are working. Some of them are showing signs of being adopted, and others are still in the exploration stage. One I think that is really starting to take off is the use of phosphate recovered in the form of struvite, which is a magnesium ammonium phosphate. And for many years, struvite was just considered a problem in many wastewater treatment facilities because it was something that would accumulate in pipes and eventually clog the pipes. But a company in Canada, actually some research in Canada, led to the development of a company called Ostara, which produces a struvite and started marketing it as a fertilizer. And so they actually recover on the order of tens of thousands of tons of struvite from wastewater and then market it as a fertilizer, which is not quite as soluble as your typical ammoniated phosphate fertilizers or triple superphosphate. But it is soluble enough to provide phosphate to the plant. And so it's actually, in effect, a little bit of a slow release phosphate. And it has started to find uses in crops like canola, where farmers would like to apply some fertilizer with the seed, but the seeds are very sensitive to the saltiness of the fertilizer. And struvite, being less soluble, has a lower salt index, but at the same time provides phosphate to the canola crop, which is certainly a phosphate-loving crop. It suits some of the application practices that are used in North America as well, and in fact, it's starting to increase enough in popularity that the manufacturer is starting to make struvite as a manufactured product rather than just something recovered. They're still continuing the recovery processes as well, but the demand is exceeding what they're able to extract from wastewater. Coated phosphates are beginning to be explored. I don't know of a firm conclusion in terms of efficacy results. People are also looking at mechanochemistry in place of acidulation. And then when we go a step further, there are researchers looking at what we call smart fertilizers, where it's coated with some product of biology that actually has sensors in it so that they can detect whether a crop plant root is growing nearby. And on that detection, the coating would dissolve or allow the nutrients to be released. This is very much in the idea stage yet. It may have been demonstrated to some degree in the lab, but it's similar to technologies used in medical science as well. The challenge we face in agriculture is that anything we place into the soil and soil environment is subjected to a wide range of enzymes from the multitude of microbes that form the soil microbiome.
Well, that concludes our enlightening conversation with Dr. Tom Broelsema. We hope you gained valuable insights into the world of soil science, phosphorus, and environmental stewardship. A big thank you again to Dr. Tom Broelsema for sharing his expertise with us today. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share it with others who might find it equally interesting. Stay tuned for more captivating discussions on the Phosphorus Podcast, your getaway to a more resilient and sustainable future. Until next time.